Hello and welcome. This is Ruben Dua, the CEO of Dubb and the host of the Connection Loop podcast. I am so psyched here to discuss so many important things with Mark Stouse, the CEO of ProofAnalytics.ai. And what we're going to talk about is how to overcome struggle with accountability, optimization, and reality. So, Mark, if you could start with a quick bio and let's get into this.
Sure. Great to be here.
Yeah.
So I am a former large company marketing leader, CMO, CCO that has been for the last 20 years or so. I've really emphasized analytics-led decision making. So
Nice.
I sort of have merged my original domain expertise with larger executive decision making within a construct of data science and things like that. And today I'm the CEO of a analytics software company called ProofAnalytics.ai.
So you made it. You made it to the CEO spot. I mean, you
Yeah,
you were
yeah.
you were a CMO converted into a CEO, that's a very natural progression,
Yeah,
right?
I mean, at one level it is. It's
Yeah.
actually very infrequent, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. I
And
mean,
for the most part, though, it doesn't have anything to do with
yeah.
being a marketer. It has everything to do with not being T-shaped enough, not having enough business knowledge,
Hmm.
not really approaching things through a business lens first. Many marketers tend to be function first in their perspective, and if I don't believe in silver bullet reasons for anything, one way or the other.
Hmm.
But I don't think it's a oversimplification to say that if marketers find that they are having a problem inside of a company or having a problem getting ahead, so to speak, in their career, um, that becoming a lot more business oriented
Hmm.
and having that layer of knowledge, that horizontal layer, is going to make a big difference.
There it is. That's such valuable information. I mean, when we look at technology companies, especially, we see a lot of folks that come from product, user experience. A lot of people come from sales, operations, and marketing. I mean, what else is there, right? So, in
Yeah,
this episode,
the big giveaway on this, right, is who's the number one CEO candidate most of the time? It's the CFO. Why
yeah,
is because in mastering the data, the financial information about the company he or she is most likely going to know more about how
mm,
it's really functioning and working and its real condition than anyone else.
there it is. There it is. So, one of the things that we discussed early on in our pre-conversation was this idea of struggle. And anyone that's taken risk, anyone that's been an entrepreneur, anyone that's tried to start something new, a business or a project, understands what I mean when I say that. I mean it from a financial perspective. I mean it from a mental health perspective. I mean it from a livelihood perspective. Um, take us through that. Like what have you learned during your struggle as an entrepreneur, and what can we take away from that?
I think that the number one thing that you learn through any kind of struggle is that you personalize it at your own risk, right? That there are certainly things or aspects that we all contribute to our own suffering and all that kind of stuff. I'm not minimizing that,
Hmm.
but if you take it personally, you will be unable to learn everything that you can learn from it.
Hmm.
It is such a costly experience that the failure to maximize the learnings is the greatest tragedy of all,
Hmm.
because you will pay the price, right? That is the only part of this that's
Yeah.
guaranteed, is that you will pay
Right.
the price. What kind of value extraction you're able to achieve is a wild card, and it largely depends on you. Suffering is like a wave that you're seeking to surf.
Hmm.
In fact, this is kind of a broadly applicable analogy. that I make often in different situations. And it is highly variable. It can be very high velocity. It can be very volatile. It can be very painful.
It can kill you.
Yeah, and so it's the quality of the feedback loops
Yeah.
that you build into it, so that you know how to surf it as best as possible. Because that's going to determine, to a large degree, not all of it by any means, but to a large degree, it's going to determine whether you wipe out or whether you finish with a flourish on the beach, right?
Yeah.
And that's just the way it is.
Yeah. I mean, this is such important advice, not to take things personally. I mean, I have a quick story to share. I recently received a message from someone on LinkedIn who signed up to Dubb, and she gave me some honest feedback. She said, "Hey, listen, I was going through this process trying to install one of our technologies, and I had a hard time, and I didn't really care for the user experience. I just wanted to let you know." And I read this message, and at first I said, how do I respond to this? How do I react to this? And I noticed myself sort of observing and thinking about it. And I said, okay, I can get defensive here and say, well, she doesn't understand this and she doesn't know how to install a Chrome extension. Or I can be humble, not take it personally, and actually go through the mental process to understand, you know what? I've been looking at that stuff for years now, and she's looked at it for 30 seconds. Maybe we did not deliver a UX experience that was positive. And it really got me thinking about exactly what you said, which is not taking things personally. And I'm going to send her a personal video message using our tech. And I'm going to say, I really appreciate your brutal honesty, because no one here on LinkedIn especially is honest. Everyone's just pitching people. And, that's just a reminder. So thank you for saying that.
No, I mean, I think that you're right, because at the end of the day, whenever my observation, so if you want to really, key tactical learning from the suffering, right? Every time there is an interpersonal issue, kind of like what you just described, one thing is guaranteed, and that is that the other person, either intentionally or unintentionally, is taking it personally.
Yeah.
So if both sides then take it personally, this is only going to go in one direction, and it's not going to be good.
Right?
Right. And so at least one of those people has to guide the conversation back to a middle ground.
Right.
And so I found that when I do that, and I don't always do it, because sometimes I'm as human as the next guy, no matter how much I feel like I've learned, right? But when I do that, it's always more constructive, than when I, like, the warning for me that I'm moving in the wrong direction is when I start to feel very self-righteous.
Yeah.
And so and there's a difference between knowing that you're right about something and feeling self-righteous about it.
Yeah, so this is some very interesting, philosophical things that we're discussing here. In mindfulness, one of the things that they talk about is observing emotions, and if we let our emotions trigger certain reactions, we're letting our amygdala basically be hijacked, and at that point, it can be physical, we can be verbal. Who knows what we're capable of doing? This is the classic thing when you're on the freeway and someone cuts you off, and then you flip them off because you're angry and you were offended, and you think that that's actually doing something. They didn't even see that finger, but it was an amygdala response. And what you're presenting is this idea of observing emotions, being able to sort of create some distance from them, so we actually can extract a learning, some data, so that we can make an improvement in our life. I mean, this is so applicable. Think about all the people that are canceling our service, the churn, the people that cancel the subscription or say unsubscribe. Like, maybe we should start listening to those people more. They left for a reason.
Yeah, I think that, this is where you get into a universal truth, right? And that life is a multivariable thing. And there's never just one thing here. And it also means that just because somebody else says your product's no good does not mean that they are correct.
Mm.
What it does probably mean is that, let's just take SaaS as an example, as a broad category. There's a lot of data right now, and it's been building now for last 3, 4, 5 years, that strongly suggests that the latest generations of SaaS represent levels of complexity and power that are beyond the capabilities of many people and teams to adequately learn and leverage.
Mm.
And so, and this gap continues to grow. It's one of the main reasons why finance teams right now are whacking the living hell out of technology buys, right? Because they can see evidence that the value that's being extracted is a lot less than what would have justified the purchase in the first place.
Yeah.
And so, I mean, the bottom line here is that this is where it really impacts your ICP.
Yeah.
In a super, super powerful way. There's a whole bunch of people that are not only not interested or ready to buy or, whatever, right? There's a whole lot of people who are unready to use what you have.
Yeah.
And if you force fit it, if you are so eloquent in your marketing and sales approach that you get them to buy anyway, yeah, you've got the revenue, but you've got it for maybe one contract cycle, right?
Yeah, it's a lower lifetime value and a higher potential churn.
Well, which has a direct impact on your reputation.
When you're in SaaS, monthly recurring revenue is everything.
It makes it harder to sell to the next person.
Yes.
If they're hearing about unhappy people.
Right. Well, you mentioned something. I'll sort of combine two things that you said into hopefully one. You mentioned that you don't believe in silver bullets, and I really appreciate that, because I think what happens as the CEO of a SaaS company, what I experience a lot is that people are seeking a silver bullet, and they might see a video, they might see an ad, they might go to our homepage, and they might be racing to go to the checkout page to put their credit card in because they're like so sold on what we built, and then they don't use it. And then they come back in a month and they haven't created any videos. They haven't used our AI. They haven't built any automations, no email campaigns, nothing. And then they're like, I'm canceling. Sorry, I'm not interested. And then we say, well, what went wrong there? What was the race to put the credit card in, but then the non-usage, the non-adoption?
Mm-hmm.
And then the second idea that you mentioned, which I'll present here, is the idea of being disillusioned, which means I'll let you describe that. So maybe you could unpack this and just share your perspective.
Yeah. So I realize this might come as a non-surprise to many and a total surprise to other large number of people that might be listening. But if we look at the word disillusionment, which normally people have a very strongly negative connotation, right? And you break it apart, it means that you have lost an illusion about something, which I would submit to you is a really polite way of saying that you have ditched a lie that you previously thought was true, and now you see that it wasn't. Is that anything but good? No, I don't think so. I think that is an absolute 100% net positive.
Yeah.
Right. And it's one of the reasons why living in reality, in factual reality, is so much more positive than anything that you could believe in. And I'm using belief in this case with quotes around it, right? There's a lot of things we believe in that are in fact true, right? But there are a lot of other things that we believe in because we want to believe them. And that's invariably and always the part of it where we get disillusioned. It's just a matter of time. It is just a matter of time. And so one of the things that I love about analytics, it's actually, a kissing cousin to physics, is that physics and analytics both are mathematical explanations for how the world really works. This can be physical, cosmological, it can be, philosophical and experiential. It could be anything about life, right? Anything about the world. It's one of the reasons why physics invariably is both a science and a philosophy. Very thing. And it doesn't mean that you should only believe in things that can be proven. That's not what this is. There's a lot of things that science doesn't know the answer to.
Yeah.
Right. But it does suggest that you are on far firmer ground when you believe in something that you can touch and feel and prove and all that kind of stuff, right?
Right.
So one of the things that we know statistically, analytically, is that there is no such thing as a silver bullet. There's never one cause. It can be a few causes or many causes, but there's never one cause, and there's never one thing that if you had done it differently would have changed the entire arc of your life or your business or whatever, right? It's just not the way it works.
Right. Well, I'll add one to your idea of when you're disillusioned, it means that you ditched the illusion. You've lost the illusion. I really connect to that. And I'll present one to you that I sort of just connected with, which is that when you're disappointed, it means that you've pointed at something with some expectation to receive it, while maybe not looking at the three fingers pointing back at yourself, as my mom says.
That's a really great riff on
that was off the top of the dome.
That's awesome. That's in fact, I think a lot of times whenever you hear that something that begins with dis, you have to look at it in those terms. It won't always be true, by the way, but I think a lot of times, as you just proved, right, it will be.
It's amazing because I think what happens a lot with AI, right? People there's this embracing of AI, there's this fear of AI that people have. Everyone's running to software platforms that leverage AI in some capacity to solve problems or create efficiencies. And there's this sometimes people have this massive expectation. I want this AI writer to create my blog post. I want it to understand my data. I want it to help me make better videos and talking avatars and who knows what else. And then there's this very immediate disappointment that happens for a lot of people that says, that's not good artwork. That's not good information. That's not good writing. That's not good X. And what I really want to understand from you as a CEO of an AI company is, how can we go and make investments into AI with the technology that we're embracing so that we can be part of the problem and guide it to where we want it to go, not have some silver bullet expectation that results, of course, in disillusion and disappointment.
No, so we can just start with a fundamental premise that across history, technology exists to further enable human beings in some way, shape, or form. It can be to do more faster. It can be to get smarter. It can, there's a lot of different iterations, kill more people, it could be whatever, right? But that's what it's always about. And its limitation, as I was kind of alluding to earlier, is always the human being's ability to handle that power effectively. So that is fundamental. So I think we have to say it's really the combination of human intelligence and experience plus AI. And AI, by the way, is a huge umbrella. There's so many different kinds of AI that talking about it monolithically is just not even remotely accurate. I mean, we need to do it conversationally, and when we're talking about philosophical issues, we can kind of get away with it here. But there's a lot of difference between different kinds of AI.
And not to mention the misuse of it. There's a technology with an algorithm, and now people are calling it AI. It's not an AI.
It's absolutely true. There's a lot of misdefinition, and a lot of people would say that automation is actually a form of AI.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot to justify that statement, and I also understand the counter argument.
Yeah.
I will say this again: we can learn so much from history here. If you really want to understand when a technology really has power and is probably going to be sticking around for a while, look at the speed with which it is weaponized. I mean, that's an almost inviolate way of approaching that question, right? Because issues of security, warfare, basically killing people, right, more effectively, whatever, is a paramount concern, right? And so if a technology, any technology, has a lot of extended potential, meaning not only what it can do in the moment, but the headroom to grow its effectiveness into the future, you're going to see you're going to see military adoption. I mean, every single time that is happening.
Yeah, that's a deep conversation.
Yeah, well, no, it says a lot about us
Right.
as a species that may not exactly be flattering.
Yeah. Well, I think that my takeaway for this is that we all have a responsibility. Anyone that's creating AI, anyone that's involved in technology, I think we all have a responsibility that with this great power, we have great responsibility and great accountability. We ultimately, we're like what you said, technology exists to further enable human beings. So
let me add something else to that.
Yeah.
So I guarantee you, every one of your listeners has heard this before. Our technology democratizes fill in the blank. Now, what they intend you to understand about that statement is that we've made it easier, or we've increased your freedom and flexibility, or whatever, right? Which is certainly part of, let's call it, let's put it in a political context briefly, that would be your rights. That's all the upside. That's the good part, right? But when you look at the word democracy or democratization, right, it invariably also means that today, as a result of that, you are more responsible for more stuff having to do with this ultimate success of the democracy or the democratized thing than you were before. When it wasn't democratized, that meant that the control of it, the responsibility of it, was up here in this ivory tower, and it was a bunch of people that you could call up and say, hey, go do this. I need this kind of outcome. And they would go and do that kind of outcome, right? When that same capability becomes democratized, that means now you get to do it yourself. This is self-serve. So what this also means, in the way that it comes together with what we were talking about earlier, is that if you don't have those skills, if you don't have the capability and the capacity to do the self-serve, you are well and truly screwed by democratization. And so, a great example for me was I was working for this company at one point, and all the company was under pressure, and more symbolically than anything else, all the senior leaders lost their EAs. or executive assistant.
That's a tough day.
Right? And there wasn't a single one of us who didn't know what that was going to mean for us. And when all of a sudden you have to go onto the computer and book your own travel,
Right.
you don't know all the tricks. Okay, you discover the hidden friction in democratization.
Right. Right. Yeah. It's funny. That's the ultimate like privileged problem. Like
No,
talk
it is.
about a first
It,
world
kind
problem.
of sucks as an illustration, right?
No,
Because
it's great. It's actually perfect because there are a lot of tricks to book travel, and it's not a great experience. You know, it's registering with the TSA and going through the process with IDs and stuff. It's I think two things occur. Number one is all of a sudden we feel all sorts of gratitude for the things that potentially we took for granted. And then the second thing is we realize that, that this is very imperfect. This whole process, online, e-commerce, booking, everything is still imperfect, So I respect that.
I mean, actually, a great example of this. So most of your audience, I think, is entrepreneurs or maybe scale ups of some kind, right?
Yeah.
So when you had a nice job inside of a large corporation,
Yeah.
and then you left to do the startup,
Yeah.
all of a sudden you experienced full on democratization because you lost all of your support.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And all of a sudden you're like, oh my God, I did not realize how much of my personal success was due to this invisible but all encompassing support system that was around me.
Right.
And you feel like a total heel a
Mm.
lot of times, right? Because you're like, dang, I kind of took all that for granted, and that's
Right.
not cool,
That's real.
right? But I mean that is, I mean, that's actually one of the biggest things we look for today in people wanting to join Proof is, can you actually do it, or are your skills today just project management skills?
Well, it's funny because
you originate the work instead of telling someone else to originate the work. Can you do it?
well, what's really interesting is that on resumes and job descriptions, we see this description of a self-starter. Are you a self-starter? We're looking for a self-starter. We don't see a self-finisher on there.
No, that's really true.
And
Also, I think that's bullshit, right?
Yeah.
I think that when you see a job listing that uses that language, that is code for your manager doesn't know how to manage.
Ah.
I mean, yeah. I'm not impressed, right? Because also the self-starter thing is almost always concentrated in the lower end of the job market, right? So even inside of a large corporation, we're talking about, 1 to 2 to 3 rungs up from the bottom, right? And so what they're trying to say is, we don't really have the time to manage you. And so we really need you to somehow magically, despite the fact that you're maybe only 1 year out of college, know what to do, know what the business priorities are, and sync them up.
Yeah.
Right. And I mean, come on. I mean, that's not real life. So I tend to be very unimpressed with that.
Yeah. Well, I think that one of the things that I always enjoyed doing, and I think one has to tread lightly with this, is creating process that didn't exist in the past. And I think this idea of, we're looking for the self-starter person, it might be code for there isn't a process created for this. And we don't know what we're doing because that's why we're hiring this person. Absolutely. And I think it's right. And I think it's great. But I think at the same time, maybe an opportunity that we can all have as either entrepreneurs or folks that work at large corporations, small corporations, we can ask ourselves, how can I be a starter and a finisher? And how can I create the process? How can I use data? How can I get the feedback loop and ultimately increase retention, happiness, you know, referrals.
So if that's the reason why you're hiring a person like this, is that you don't really know what's really necessary, then tell them that and
Yeah.
say, you know, I'm really attracted to hiring, to the prospect of hiring you, because I think you know a lot that we don't know.
Mm,
We kind of need a reverse mentor
yeah.
relationship for a while.
Mm,
I think that you're the mentor in this particular area, right? That's an extremely attractive thing
mm-hmm.
to say, assuming that you mean it, right? That's an extremely attractive thing to say to a prospective hire.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, I think that that's legit. That's totally
Yeah.
legit. But to say, uh, we're going to just throw you into the deep end of the pool, for one, and if you successfully get it done, then we'll know you are awesome. And if you're
Right.
down, we'll fish
Right.
your body out and, do something with it. I mean, I have a real, I don't know. I have a fundamental, I think that's lazy management. And,
Yeah.
and it also speaks to a kind of a Darwinistic view
Mm,
of people that is, can be at least, very inhuman.
mm. Yeah. There it is. Very, very valuable information here. So talk to us about proof analytics. What's like the biggest problem that you guys are trying to solve, and what is it that we need to be aware about in our lives when it comes to this?
So I think, it's true all the time, but I don't think, it's really, really, really true right now, given the situation in the macro and all that kind of stuff. Businesses kind of turn on a lot of things that can be summarized as either accountability or optimization. These are kind of in tension all the time. So you typically account for the cost side and you want to optimize the upside. Um, so if we look at the way most people do accountability type thing, this is planning, budgeting, accounting for actual costs versus projected costs, things like that. It's done in Excel, and the files are emailed around, and version control is lost, and it's just a mess, right?
Mm,
So this is not rocket science, right? Every function in corporate life has an ERP. In this particular case, because we tend to focus pretty tightly on go-to-market, we have one of the best MRM tools, marketing resource management, or it actually can encompass marketing, sales, customer success, and product type
mm,
reference points. And so this is where you do the planning and the budgeting and asset management and, compliance. And it's, pretty much, if you understand what an ERP is, just extend that from whatever area of a company you're most familiar with. The same functions and categorization, all that kind of stuff, are totally transferable from function to function, right?
mm. Great.
So this is a very
Yeah.
organized way of understanding that side of the ledger, so to speak. And then the optimization side is, hey, the world is a very complex place. We have the wave, we have us trying to surf the wave. We have lots of different factors in play at any given time. How do we understand, relative to all the investments that we're making in a particular area, how are we understanding how those are performing against a particular outcome that's highly desired? So there's a stack rank in terms of the ability, the power of those relationships to generate ROI. There's also a stack rank on time lag. Time lag is what's the amount of time that has to pass between when you spend the money and when you start to recognize returns. This is all, the math on all this has been around for a long time.
Mm.
It is now systematized in software so that you can operationalize all these insights in a way that's very consumable, very fast, low latency. You don't have to wait around. I mean, a lot of times what business users, what business leaders find is so frustrating about dealing with their data science team or their analytics team is that they ask the question, they hear nothing for 3 months, right? And somewhere in there, they have to make the decision no matter what. And then all of a sudden, the data science guys show up, too little, too late, too many caveats, right, into the equation, and they say, "Oh, this is all the," and you're like, "Dude, I made that decision 2 months ago," right? And that's a big issue. It sounds trivial, but actually, it's like you could even say it's the cornerstone problem between analytics teams and business teams, right? And so the other part of our solution solves for that, not from a mathematical point of view, because the math is the math. It doesn't need, there's no way to make it substantially better, particularly for business use. It's all about consumability, speed, scalability, latency, all the cost, right? So we take enormous amounts of cost out of this process for customers. I mean, because to this point, they've had to use people. They've had to use a lot of consultants, a lot of data scientists, very expensive people to do this. And software is what software is, right? Software is taking all that and turning it into something that's, comparatively speaking, lickety split, right? And so that takes a lot of cost out as well. And then we put a front end on it that is very friendly to non-data scientists, because what we found is that, believe it or not, actually, outside of finance anyway, most business teams have an allergic reaction to graphs. They can deal with charts just fine, but graphs, another thing altogether. So we kind of came up with, because of some key learnings with customers, we came up with a different way of communicating what's going on so that they can actually make better decisions. It's the idea that analytics is ultimately a GPS, and that the problem you face in business is really a navigation problem. So you're cruising along, you're doing what you're doing, and all of a sudden things change. Well, what do I do now? Right? Do I spend more money, less money? Do I turn right? Do I turn left? What do I do? Right? That's a navigation problem. And that's how we present it. And then we give you the ability right there on the screen to war game a response and say, okay, what is it going to take? What am I going to have to do? And what are my options to get back on track?
Well, listen, I have a final question for you. Where is this beautiful sunset? Where was this photo taken?
That actually is right outside my house in Arizona. I live in Paradise Valley, and that's looking out over the valley right there. It's a morning shot that I took probably a month ago. Arizona, well, most of the desert Southwest, there's a lot of dust in the air at high altitudes. Strangely enough, not really at low altitudes. So you don't really, this is not something you really perceive in your daily life, right? But up high, there's a lot of dust. You see this also in places like East Africa, right? And it's the whole reason why sunrises and sunsets in those areas are so spectacular. If you get an area that doesn't have much dust in the air, you're not going to get this. You're not going to get anything that looks like that, right?
Interesting.
And so that's what that is.
Well, in LA we have smog that does that for us.
Yep. Well, smog is, so I was just in Malibu, right? There's some great sunsets in Malibu, but you're not going to get the broad, almost painterly sunsets, because even with the smog is gaseous. And so there's not really anything for the light to refract off of, which, so when there's a lot of dust in the air, the reason why you get these colors is that the light is refracting off of the dust, and the dust is essentially minerals in the air, right? And every mineral has a color. So that's what you're getting. And so, in a sense, the skies are always a representation of the geological reality of that area. So one thing that East Africa gets a lot of in their skies that you'll never see in Arizona is a lot of purples and blues. And it's mainly because of things like cobalt, not exactly healthy, by the way, but it's stuff like that in the air that refracts as blues and purples.
That's beautiful. I mean, that's a really good thing to know and learn. I was in Maui just up until this last Monday, and this has just been a very difficult process with the fires that are occurring still in Hawaii and Maui, in Lahaina. I mean, I was in Lahaina every day, and I remember feeling so much gratitude looking at that Maui sunset. You know, the way that the dust and the water vapor and all the gases, it augments the atmosphere to look like such a perfect sunset. It's unbelievable. And it's just it's a reminder, when we look at the sunset and we look at whatever's beautiful in our lives, that we should be filled with gratitude. Because
you are so right. It's so easier to become obsessed with your suffering, right, than it is to be thankful. And being thankful is like the ultimate antidote. It doesn't take away the suffering, but it helps give you a better perspective. I think a really, really super crude version of this, right, which I think anybody can relate to having done this, right? So I'm not in saying it's super crude. I'm not trying to be, saintly here, right? But we look at something like what happened in Lahaina, or a huge hurricane, the devastation from a huge hurricane or something like that, right? And where your mind often goes is, wow, that's so terrible. I'm so glad that's not me. Right? So we use it as sort of to create a new denominator relative to our own suffering, which is the numerator. But it's a very fragile and actually stupid idea, right? Because you can't compare suffering. Because again, this is sort of a, let's talk about it analytically, right? Suffering from so much of it depends how we perceive it, and how we walk through suffering is relative to everything else that's going on in our life. So for example, if you have a lot of money in the bank, I'm not trying to trivialize something, I'm just trying to make it clear, right? If you have a lot of money in the bank, you can withstand a lot more suffering than someone who doesn't have a lot of money in the bank. Because there's a lot of things that can be reasonably resolved by the expenditure of money. Whether it's better medical care, resolution of business problems, whatever it is, right? I mean, that's sort of a generalized truth. And so if the person who doesn't have a lot is going to be, in some respects, all of the things being equal, is going to be far more vulnerable to suffering. The thing that makes it different, right, is if they have also done work inside themselves that makes them more fundamentally resilient than even the wealthy person, then that's a game changer. And the thing that I would always say to people is, everything that you have can be taken away, except for one thing, and that is the work that you've done on yourself. The only way that can be taken away is for you to exit stage right on the world, right? At which point it doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But otherwise, that can't be taken away from you.
Yeah. Well, listen, this is a great place to cap this. I really appreciate you. I will end with my gratitude to you for your time and for sharing your perspective and your insights on this. I encourage people to go check out Mark Stouse's account on LinkedIn. 28,000 followers are there, and I encourage you to be one more. And then proofanalytics.ai is the website. So go on and check those sites out. And Mark, thanks for your time.
No, thank you. Best way to reach me, bar none, is to send me a DM on LinkedIn.
There it is. Thanks, Mark. Appreciate you.
Thanks,
Stick around
Mark.
for some show notes.
All right.